For anyone out there who raised kids back when we did, things were so different, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Before cell phones and the internet, it was a whole other world.
Yeah.
Having to just trust your kid would call from a payphone if they needed something.
Right.
Well, today's deep dive is about a case that really taps into those fears. The story of Alvin and Judith Neely.
It really is a fascinating case from a sociological perspective,
Yeah.
Looking back at that era, but it goes beyond that too. It's a story of manipulation, crime, and ultimately tragedy.
Right.
And we're going to try to unpack how it all unfolded using court testimonies, police reports, even personal letters.
Exactly. So we're really going deep.
Yeah, deep dive.
And it all starts with Alvin Neely. One source described his childhood as a festival of joy. Active in the Boy Scouts, always had a smile, charming by all accounts. It's almost impossible to picture that image with the crimes he later committed.
It's that stark contrast that makes this case so interesting.
Right.
Was that happy-go-lucky persona a facade? Or was there some sort of turning point that led him down this path?
It's a question that lingers over this entire story.
Yeah.
But looking at the timeline, things started to change when Alvin reached high school. The sources show a pattern of petty crimes escalating to car theft.
Yes, and I think this is where we start to see those first signs of his manipulative tendencies.
Okay.
He met Joanne Browning when she was only 15.
15.
He was 20 at the time. And the relationship quickly turned into this cycle of abuse.
Oh.
Physical assaults, intense paranoia about affairs, forcing Joanne into complete submission.
I read that he would stretch the corners of Joanne's mouth with his fingers during beatings.
Ugh, it's a chilling detail. And it's important to understand that this kind of behavior is really a classic sign of abusers.
Yeah.
It's about exerting power and inflicting pain and just breaking down the victim's sense of self.
Of course.
The fact that he continued this abuse even while Joanne was pregnant with their child is just speaks volumes about his lack of empathy and the depth of his cruelty.
It's heartbreaking. And what's even more unsettling is that even after Joanne escaped, Alvin retained custody of their 3 children.
Yeah, and for those of you who are dealing with divorce and custody battles back then,
Right.
You know how difficult it was, especially for women in abusive relationships.
Absolutely. It was a different time. And the system often failed to protect victims.
Sadly, yeah.
And tragically, it was during this period after Joanne left that Alvin met 15-year-old Judith Adams.
This is where the story takes a very disturbing turn.
Yeah. Judith had a troubled background of her own. Her father passed away when she was young, her mother was unstable, and she had to take on so much responsibility for her younger siblings.
Exactly, and that kind of instability and trauma in childhood can create a real vulnerability to manipulation.
Right.
And it can really warp a young person's sense of reality, making them more susceptible to someone like Alvin, who preyed on those vulnerabilities.
And speaking of preying on vulnerabilities, the circumstances of their meeting are almost too ironic. Your sources say Alvin and a friend visited Judith's home, not to meet her, but to meet her mother, who was using a CB radio to meet men.
It's almost like fate, or maybe a cosmic joke, brought them together.
Right.
You have Alvin with his history of violence and attraction to young girls, and Judith desperate for connection and stability after a chaotic upbringing. It was a recipe for disaster.
And disaster is exactly what unfolded. Judy dropped out of school, moved in with Alvin, and they embarked on a life of petty theft and violence.
It's crucial to remember, though, that while Judith may have participated in these crimes, she was still a minor, heavily influenced by an older manipulative partner with a history of abuse.
Right. And that brings up a big question that will stay with us throughout this whole deep dive. To what extent was Judith a willing participant? And to what extent was she a victim of Alvin's manipulation? It's a question with no easy answers, but one we'll keep exploring as we go deeper into this case.
Absolutely. A very complex situation, for sure.
Absolutely.
It really is a question that gets to the heart of it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to understand Judith's role in all this, how her past and Alvin's influence kind of combined,
Yeah.
to lead them down this road.
It really is like a puzzle with shifting pieces.
Yeah.
But one thing that's clear from what we've read is that their crimes escalated pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It went beyond petty theft.
Way beyond.
They started targeting staff from the Youth Development Center where Judith had spent some time.
Right. And that's where that shared delusion comes in, that us against the world mentality.
Yeah.
It gets really scary there. They were so convinced that everyone was out to get them that they felt justified in just lashing out.
Right.
Does that resonate with any of our listeners out there?
Right.
That feeling that the world is against you,
Yeah.
it's a really powerful emotion. And in their case, it led to some terrifying actions.
For sure. It's a feeling many can relate to, but in their case, it led to violence.
Yeah.
First, they went after Ken Doley, a teacher at the YBC. They shot at his house.
Yeah, thankfully he wasn't home.
Can you imagine the terror his family must have felt?
It's just a stark reminder that actions have consequences.
Yeah.
Even in their warped reality, they were hurting real people.
Right.
And it didn't stop there. They firebombed Linda Adair's home, another YDC employee.
And the details are so disturbing. Judith was making these taunting phone calls
Oh, yeah.
to the victims,
Yeah.
even to the police.
Yeah.
Like they were playing this game.
It's like they wanted the attention,
Right.
that warped sense of control. It's a cunning thing we see.
Yeah.
This need to be recognized, even if it's for horrific acts.
Right. And those acts were about to take an even darker turn.
Much darker.
The sources detail their most horrific crime, the abduction and murder of 13-year-old Lisa Milliken.
It's hard to even talk about.
Yeah, it's tough. Lisa was lured from the mall, held captive in motels, subjected to just unspeakable things.
And the fact that Judith injected Lisa with Drano and liquid plumber based on some so-called tip Alvin got in prison, it's just beyond comprehension.
It's a level of cruelty that's just really hard to grasp.
Yeah, and what's so chilling is that they were calling the police throughout all this, taunting them with clues about Lisa blaming others. It's like they were writing their own twisted narrative.
It makes you wonder, what drives a young woman like Judith to do these things? Was it some misguided loyalty? Was she just that much under Alvin's control that she lost all sense of right and wrong?
It's probably a number of factors. Judith's past her vulnerability to Alvin, maybe even a need for his approval.
It leaves us at the end of part 2 with this really unsettling feeling, knowing that their reign of terror wasn't over yet.
Yeah, not even close.
It's hard to imagine things getting worse, but they do. We left off with Lisa Milliken's murder, but there's more.
Yeah, a lot more. The investigators, they found something even more disturbing than the violence itself. A plan. Lisa's abduction was just one piece of it.
A plan. What could be more disturbing?
Well, they wanted to abduct multiple girls, hold them hostage, bargaining chips.
Bargaining ships.
Yeah, in their vendetta against the Youth Development Center, they were gonna, create their own twisted justice. Force the YDC staff to confess to the abuse Judith claimed she suffered.
Oh my God. Hold these innocent girls hostage to right what they saw as wrongs. Unbelievable.
It shows just how delusional they were, how deep that spiral went. They actually believed these acts were justified.
Thinking about raising teenagers back then, it really hits home. No cell phones, no way to track them. A parent's worst nightmare.
It really was a different time. Makes you appreciate the tools we have now, but also the importance of vigilance and open communication no matter what.
So this horrifying plan, how did it all end? How did they get caught?
Well, this is before cell phones, widespread internet, good old-fashioned detective work, witness testimonies, motel records, forensics, a real race against time, piece together clues from a pre-digital world.
Like a detective novel. What kind of clues? Any close calls?
Several. Motel owners, guests. They noticed things, something off about the trio, but didn't connect the dots. A reporter took those chilling phone calls seriously, alerted the authorities, small actions, big impact.
It shows we all have a part to play. What about Judith, though? Was she all in on this plan or still under Alvin's thumb?
Hard to say definitively. The sources, they paint different pictures. Some say willing accomplice, driven by anger and revenge. Others suggest she was manipulated, a victim of Alvin's control.
Back to that central question, victim, perpetrator, or both?
The complexity of this case? No easy answers, but their reign of terror did end. Arrested, tried, convicted.
Justice served, but at such a cost. Lisa's life lost, and so many others affected.
It's a sobering reminder that even decades later, the impact of trauma, it lingers. A call to action for all of us. Learn from this, recognize the signs, protect young people.
Heavy but important. We need to end on a note of hope. We can break these cycles, create safe communities, seek justice.
Exactly. As we close this deep dive, keep thinking about these questions. What is justice in a case like this? Accountability, but also understanding the circumstances. And how do we prevent these tragedies?
Questions worth pondering. We hope this deep dive has given you something to think about. Thanks for joining us.